Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Daniel Truckenbrough, and I'm an Associate Marketing Manager at Brooks Publishing. And I'm very happy to have Samuel Odom and Sam here to talk about promoting evidence-based practices and programs for children and youth with autism. So before we begin, I just have a few things to go over. First, on your screen, you'll see a few webinar tips for watching today's webinar. If you have any applications open, such as another web browser or email, if you close that, that can increase your bandwidth to improve your viewing experience today. If you have any questions during this webinar, you can enter those in the questions tab of the webinar panel, and we'll be taking questions at the end during a Q&A session. And if you'd like to minimize the webinar panel, there's a little orange arrow at the top of that panel. You can click that to minimize it, and it'll push it out of the way so you can see the presentation. And then you can click that arrow again, and it'll expand the panel. And if you're having any audio issues during the webinar, check your audio tab of the webinar panel to make sure that you have the correct speakers selected and that your speakers are turned up. And if that's not working, you can try the phone call option in the audio panel, and there's instructions for dialing and using your phone. And we are doing a book giveaway today. So we are giving away one free copy of a book of the winner's choice, up to $75 in value. One attendee will be selected at random and notified after the webinar. So if you go ahead and enter any questions, that can help increase your chances of winning. And lastly, certificates of attendance are available for all webinar viewers and recording viewers as well. And I'll be providing a little bit more information about how to access your certificate towards the end of the webinar. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce your presenters today. Dr. Samuel Odom is a senior research scientist at the Frank Porter Graham Child Development Institute at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and research professor emeritus at the UNC School of Education. Dr. Odom is the author or co-author of over 200 publications and the editor or co-editor of 11 books on early childhood intervention and developmental disabilities. Dr. Odom has been the recipient of numerous awards and honors for his work in early childhood, including the Special Education Research Award from the Council for Exceptional Children, the Distinguished Graduate Award from the University of Washington College of Education, the Arnold Lucius Giselle Prize from the Theodore Helbridge Foundation, and Dr. Odom was awarded an honorary doctorate from Stockholm University. And Dr. Sam is an advanced research scientist at the Frank Porter Graham Child Development Institute at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Dr. Sam's research interests are rooted in her direct experience as a public school teacher working in preschool and kindergarten classrooms with students with autism. The primary goal of Dr. Sam's work is to increase awareness and use of evidence-based interventions and resources designed to improve outcomes for students with autism. Dr. Sam led the development of the Autism-Focused Intervention Resource and Modules, or AFFIRM, which provides free online modules for evidence-based practices for children and youth with autism. Dr. Sam is currently co-principal investigator for supporting paraprofessional teachers' use of evidence-based practices with learners with autism research project. Drs. Odom and Sam are also co-developers of the Autism Program Environmental Rating Scale, or APERS, which was designed to assess quality indicators of programs for children and youth with autism spectrum disorder. So without further ado, Drs. Sam and Odom, thank you so much for joining us today.
Okay, I'll get us started. My name is Sam Odom, and you heard through the introduction that I'm senior research scientist at FPG. Also, I'm adjunct professor in the Department of Special Education at San Diego State University. What you see on the screen before you, and you've been looking at for a few moments, are the acknowledgements of the support that we've had for conducting this research. And then on the next slide, we want to disclose that both Ann and I are among the authors of the Autism Program Environment Rating Scale, which will be published by Brooks. We've received a modest honorarium for the final development of the instrument, but the royalties are going to be going to the National Clearinghouse for Autism Research and Practice. As we get geared up to go back to in-class programs for children in general in schools. There will be teachers who are new to having children with autism in their classrooms. There'll be teachers who are new to teaching in general. And there will be individuals who are experienced teachers who've worked with children with autism before and want to establish an evidence-based program or verify that they're providing an evidence-based program. We've proposed that evidence-based programs consist of several components. One is a quality feature of their programs. The second is the establishment of goals, observable and measurable goals. The third is use of evidence-based practice with a high level of fidelity. And all of those are supported, especially in their initial adoption, through a coaching process. The work that I'm going to talk about was first begun with our National Professional Development Center on Autism Spectrum Disorders, which was funded by Office of Special Education Programs, Department of Education, which our initial funding was in 2007. And that work has been pretty much continuous ever since that time, although our funding from OSEP ran out around 2012. Next slide. Through NPDC, we developed a program or a model for establishing classrooms, programs in schools that would support the use of evidence-based practices. And they consist of those elements that I talked about before: quality, identification of goals, use of evidence-based practices, and the identification of an evidence-based practice that links to specific goals. So the first part of this presentation, I'm going to briefly talk about strengthening quality of the program. We believe that the quality of a classroom program or a program within a school, if it might be an inclusive program, there might be multiple classrooms, several classrooms, that the quality of the program serves as the foundation for effective use of evidence-based practices. And so individuals wonder sometimes, teachers wonder sometimes, what does this term quality mean in programs? So in the next slide, we have identified a set of features of programs. We call them domains in the assessment we developed that represent program quality, general program quality. It involves interdisciplinary teaming within the school or within the program, family participation, and then a set of elements or domains that represent what we call program ecology. So learning environment and the positive learning climate are two general features of the ecology, as well as more specific features that focus directly in on instruction, communication and interventions, social competence, personal independence, functional behavior, which is addressing challenging behaviors. All of those represented within IEPs. Those blend together to generate program quality, which then affect child outcomes. The Autism Program Environment Rating Scale we developed in over the years with NPDC, mainly because we couldn't find another scale that did exactly the same thing, that established a foundational level of quality. There are two versions, the preschool elementary version and a middle school high school version. They have different numbers of items mostly because the middle school high school has an additional domain that addresses transition to post-school employment and community. The item format is a 5-point Likert scale, and it yields information that identifies program strengths and areas of improvement, measurement, and measures change across within programs, change in program quality. Okay, next slide. This is just a quick example of what one item looks like. It's organized into indicators. So as a rater uses information that you'll hear about. They then draw on that set of information to check off the indicators that represent that may represent low quality, which the indicators under the one column represent. Average or adequate quality, which are the indicators under the 3 column, and superior quality or high quality, which are indicators under the 5 column. The information that we draw from are observations in the classrooms, interviews, record review, and all of those are used in scoring the rating. And next slide. And that generates a debriefing report. The APERS will calculate, the APERS program will calculate scores. On this graph is a profile of a classroom with the vertical line in the middle indicating a 3 indicator, which means an adequate level of quality. So you can see in this program, there are a number of elements or domains where the quality is quite good or adequate. So learning environment, positive classroom climate, family involvement, and then also other domains where it's lower and could represent challenges and areas of improvement. We use the results to work with programs to design to improve the quality within schools, within classroom programs, and which again sets the context for the use of evidence-based practices in the programs. So given that we've done our initial work on establishing quality, selecting using evidence-based practices are the next step. So we very much move from IEP goals that we establish, and you can see in this graphic as we're moving from left to right, we identify goals that are observable and measurable. We collect the quality data and identify those goals in the first 8 weeks of the school year. We have used goal attainment scaling to create a rating for goals for progress toward goals. Primarily goals, as we work with teachers, we establish with them or work with them to establish goals that are measurable and observable. And we're not going to have time to talk too much about what that means, but in using the goal attainment scale, we can establish benchmarks from current performance to accomplishing the goal, which current performance is a 0, accomplishing the goal is a 3, exceeding the annual goal is a 5. And this is the type of rating that might be used during the year or especially at the end of the year. Initial startup time, we usually, when we're working with schools, we have an introductory training academy, training on the goal attainment scale and the APERS, and then introduction to evidence-based practices and planning. And this is just the way that we've worked with schools in the past. So, and this is all embedded within a coaching process that leads to adoption. So quickly, I'm going to sort of motor through this information about evidence-based practices because just for time's sake, we just have a little bit of time with you today. In 2020, we published our 3rd review of evidence-based practices, and you can see on the screen here that report. An article has also been published online, will come out in the Journal of Autism and Developmental Disorders. Evidence-based practices are focused interventions. They produce specific behavioral or developmental outcomes for children and have been demonstrated as effective by applied research they can be successfully implemented in education settings, or that's one of the criteria that they be implemented. We have grouped in our last review, we identified 28 evidence-based practices. And we have, for clarity, we grouped these into categories. So what you'll see as I move through this are the evidence-based practices themselves. In this case, basic applied behavior analysis practices like reinforcement, prompting, time delay, modeling, are listed on the right side of the screen, and our conceptual grouping is on the left. So for each of these in the report, we define what we mean by reinforcement, what the operational definition is of reinforcement, the outcomes that studies that we found for children with autism of different ages, as well as the specific articles that we located. So basic applied behavior analysis practices are one type of evidence-based practices or set of evidence-based practices. Next slide. We've identified two that focus on assessment or behavioral assessment, that is functional behavioral assessment. That's a part of most programs to address challenging behaviors for children with autism. Task analysis is a second type of assessment. There are three types of behavioral instruction that we identified. Discrete trial training that's used in many programs for children with autism. Direct instruction that came out of the Oregon group that focuses on academic and other goals, and behavioral momentum is a third behavioral instruction. Apologies for the formatting on this slide. A set of practices that are commonly come together within positive behavior intervention and support programs for children with autism who have challenging behaviors. Rose to the level of evidence-based, individual evidence-based practices within our review. So antecedent interventions, redirection of behavior, extinction, differential reinforcement of other behavior, and functional communication training. A number of interventions we have characterized as naturalistic or occurring in natural environments. Naturalistic interventions are one class. Second class that's similar, and there are overlaps really between these practices, are parent implemented interventions. We also in our review identified as some of the programs that fit within our evidence-based practice that have substantial evidence for in and of themselves as being effective. So Jasper by Connie Cassidy, milieu training by Ann Kaiser and group, pivotal response training by the Kegels. Under parent implemented interventions, Project Impact and Stepping Stones are two programs that have very strong sets of data of evidence and which we acknowledge. Next slide. So we're waiting for the next slide. As we're waiting for the next slide to come up, the programs that I identified, Jasper, milieu training, pivotal response training, those are, we've called them manualized interventions that meet criteria. That is, in and of themselves, they could meet the criteria we established for evidence-based practices. But the naturalistic, they fit, because their procedures are very similar, they fit within the kind of the naturalistic classification.
Sam, I think we may have lost Anne. Um,
Can you pull up, Daniel, can you pull up the slideshow and just advance it?
yes, yep.
Okay.
All right, here we go. Oops, give me 1 second.
Okay,
Sorry
sure.
to our audience for just bear with us for 1 moment.
I'm back, so I can share it.
Oh, hi Anne. Here we go. Anne, I just passed you the screen controls again.
Okay, sorry about that. Are you able to see it now?
Yes.
Okay,
Good.
perfect. Sorry.
No, that's all right. I'll jump back in. Another kind of conceptual grouping for evidence-based practices are social skills training with peers, not being the only social skills training practice that we call evidence-based, but it is a curriculum, it is a strategy that has a lot of empirical support by Liz Lageson and group at UCLA. Peer-based interventions in which peers deliver or peers engage children with autism. Sorry, that train you hear in the backgrounds from me. Okay, next slide. Social narratives and augmentative alternative communication strategies are another set of evidence-based practices, again, with 2 specific types of interventions within each that has a very strong level of evidence. Visual supports or visually based interventions, that is visual supports and video modeling, with video modeling having just a large literature that has emerged over the last 5 or 6 years. Visual supports being sort of a mainstay of many programs for children with autism. Next slide. We call these modality-specific interventions, so exercise and movement, music-mediated interventions. Sensory integration, we want to specifically emphasize that the specific practice that we identified was the AIRS sensory integration model, which is delivered by occupational therapists. It might be supported under the supervision of occupational therapists, but it requires training, and mostly only occupational therapists deliver this type of intervention. And last, technology-assisted interventions, instruction and intervention. Again, a couple of practices or a couple of programs that have strong evidence. So I'm going to turn this next part over to Anne.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ann Sam. Sorry about the technical difficulties we were having. So I want to talk, Sam just went over 28 practices, and it can be somewhat overwhelming to know where do you go for choosing one of those or selecting one of those evidence-based practices to use for a specific goal that you might be working on with a student. And so we've actually come up with a whole process about how you use these practices in classrooms or in the clinics that you might work with. And it's first starting with the selecting and planning for evidence-based practices, implementing those with fidelity, because we know that the best outcomes for children happen when these practices are used with high fidelity. And then how do we monitor progress and know what next steps need to be taken? So when you're selecting an evidence-based practice, our team at FPG has worked with to kind of come together on what are some key considerations that we need to think about when you're selecting an evidence-based practice. And the first one is think about the characteristics of the child you're working with in the family. This can include what's worked well in the past, what perhaps has not worked as well. Also think about characteristics of the team or teacher that's working with this child. For example, does the teacher have a specific training or the clinician have specific training on a certain practice already? That is a great strength to pull from with that pre-existing knowledge. So for example, if the teacher has training on some of the applied behavior with applied behavior analysis, those are some key practices you might want to draw from. Also, if they have training specifically on using visual supports or maybe more of a structured teaching format. So take those into account. You also want to think about other resources that might be available. So for example, if you wanted to use a technology aided instruction or intervention with children, you'd have to see if you had those sorts of resources, or if you wanted to use assistive technology, augmentative and assistive technology in communication, you would need to think about what resources you have to draw from. And then the final component are clues found in the outcome or the goal. And so for this element, the work with NCAPE and the review that Sam mentioned previously has linked each of these specific evidence-based practices to outcomes that are supported by research. So you can see a variety of outcomes that we have looked at, such as outcomes related to social communication needs, as well as academic, motor, vocational, adaptive and self-help, and then school readiness skills. I just wanted to point out kind of the difference between pre-academic and academic versus school readiness skills. Academic skills are those tasks that you're working on that are taught within the school setting. So this could be math, reading, literacy. The school readiness skills are performance tasks that need to be able to, a child might need to be able to do to be able to access that content that's being presented. So this, a lot of times this ends up being kind of those engagement pieces that we're looking at. And so as part of the NCAPE review, and we will give you links to these at the end of our presentation, so you can have these resources we're presenting for free, are available on our websites. And so what you can see at the top here are the different domains that we have related to cognitive or school readiness, play skills. And along the left side column are abbreviations for each of the 28 evidence-based practices. Then for the yellow squares and notations are denoting practices that are linked to these domains for the early childhood range from 0 to 5. The blue indicates elementary, early middle school ages, and then the green is for our young adults and high school students from 15 years up. And so you can see that there has been a lot more research and evidence-based for this younger age group than we have for high school students and above. This is, I don't have time to go through specifically how you use this, but there is lots of wonderful resources on our firm website, which I will share with you all. So I did also want to talk about, once a goal is a match to a specific evidence-based practice, in our NPDC professional development model that Sam talked about previously, we have this coaching process that we follow. And for our coaching, people use coaching to refer to different things. And so when we say coaching, we have these tenets that we try to keep in mind when we're working with practitioners and teachers. And this is that we are supporting the teachers and practitioners' ability to apply knowledge and skills that they have, that we have focused content that encourages practitioners and teachers to use data and feedback on their performance to enhance their practice and use of skills with children. And then we also keep adult learning principles in mind in order to show, recognize the professionalism of practitioners and teachers, the role that they play, and their ability to make decisions. And so what our coaching process is a cyclical process, which has three primary components, where we have a pre-observation with a practitioner or teacher, where we talk about the specific evidence-based practice that they plan to use and adopt with the child that they're working on around a selected goal. This makes it a very targeted observation. The teacher knows exactly what we are going to be observing, what we will be looking for. There's really no surprises. And then we come in and we do an observation where the teacher's using that selected evidence-based practice, and we complete a fidelity or an implementation checklist about how closely they are using that practice, what steps they might be forgetting, or what data they might need to be collecting. So we are able to observe them, and then we follow up with a post-observation conference where we sit down with them, talk about what we saw during our observation. They share with us things that they thought went well, things that they think that they should be able to improve on, and then we come up with a plan. It kind of cycles back to that pre-observation where we think about a plan for next steps, what they'll be working on before the coach comes back to observe again. So it's clearly defined roles between the coach as well as the teacher and practitioner about what will be addressed in next steps forward. So for all of you that might not have coaches that you're working with and as teachers in schools, it can be kind of daunting to think, okay, there's 28 practices, but where do I go from here? What resources can I use? How do I use these in my classroom with specific children? So we have developed the AFFIRM modules, which I mentioned previously. This stands for the Autism Focused Intervention Resources and Modules. This is a free website. We received funding from the Office of Special Education Programs to develop these a number of years ago. The link is here. And our target audience includes special education teachers, related service professionals such as occupational therapists, speech language pathologists, general education teachers, paraprofessionals, and early interventionists. And so each of those practices that Sam talked about, we have a process of how do you actually use that practice when you're working with a child? So we go through, how do you plan to use that practice? What does it look like when you're using it? And then how do you take data and collect information on how well the child's doing in relation to that goal, and how well teachers and practitioners are using that evidence-based practice with fidelity? This is just a screenshot here of what an account looks like on the AFFIRM modules. So you do have to create an account to use this. However, it's completely free and it's used to track your own progress. So we have free certificates of completion when you complete modules, and we also offer continuing ed units for a small fee, as well as type 2 CEs, in case that's of interest to you. We have so many supplemental materials that are available for download for free when you're using this. So on your screen here, you can see an example of our implementation checklist for prompting. So these are the specific steps of how do you use prompting with a high level of fidelity. And it goes through the different, you can see here, it goes through the different types of prompting that might happen. So least to most, graduated guidance, that's simultaneous prompting. So we have one of these for each of our evidence-based practices. We also have step-by-step practice guides, which take each of these steps and gives additional detail and information. We have parents' guides that link this information that you can share with parents, that are downloadable, free to just print off and give to parents. We also have tip sheets for professionals. So if you're working with a team of individuals, you can share this information with related service providers, general education teachers, to make sure that everyone's on the same page. We also have data sheets. So it can be really overwhelming to think about how you make data sheets for all the children and all the goals that you work with. And so we have many data sheets that are available for free that you can download. They're available in both PDF format as well as Word, so you're able to change them and edit them as needed. We also have recently launched a firm for paraprofessionals, which is specific foundational evidence-based practices for paraprofessionals working with children with autism. Again, these are also free. We have modules for reinforcement, prompting, time delay, and visual supports. We will be launching 2 additional modules over the summer that are for visual schedules, as well as helping paraprofessionals support peer interactions with children with autism. We, in response to COVID, we also have developed home companion guides, which correspond with our Firm for Paraprofessional modules that we have. But these home companion guides are brief packets that provide information for families about what are these foundational practices, such as reinforcement and prompting, how would they use these at home, and what are some tips and things that they can use. And so very much home-based scenarios. So encourage you to explore those and use them if helpful for you. We also have an introduction to autism module on the Affirm website as well. And this just provides an overview about what autism is, key characteristics around social and communication, restricted and repetitive behaviors, and then how this might look in school settings. This is specifically geared towards elementary schools, but it could also be used for younger children, practitioners who work with younger children or older children if needed to. And then finally, I wanted to also point out that we have some COVID-specific resources. If we have resources specifically for supporting individuals with autism through kind of uncertain times when we're not sure about what might be happening next. We have similar packets for adults with autism as well, and some school resources as well for coming back into schools. And so these the COVID-related resources are again free. We have tons of downloadable resources about schedules for homes and choice boards and how might you cope or use calming skills, the importance of building and then maintaining routines, and then also some help around interfering behaviors or challenging behaviors that might occur given all the changes that we've all experienced over the years of the course of the last year. These resources are also available in a number of different languages, such as Mandarin, Spanish. So please check this out and if it might be a resource for you. Here are the links for our various projects that we have at FPG. The Affirm module, as you can see, it's affirm.fpg.unc.edu. The report that Sam mentioned around evidence-based practices can be found on our NCAPE website, and so you can see the link for that on your screen now. So I think I'm going to turn it back over to Daniel at this point for questions and discussion.
Yes, thank you so much, Ann and Sam. Great information in there, and the Affirm modules just seem to be packed with resources and materials to help professionals. So we've gotten a few questions in. Let me bring up my webinar panel here. So again, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and enter those into the questions tab, and we'll be taking those. So we did have a few listeners asking about the APERS. So we have one listener that was asking, is the APERS something that could be used in a Head Start classroom, or is it really only for programs that are specifically focused on children with autism?
Well, Ann, do you want me to take that?
Yes, Sam, why don't you take that one?
Yeah, so the APERS can be used for inclusive and special education programs that are more self-contained in nature. So the answer to that question is yes. It will look at specific features or elements of the Head Start program that apply to children with autism or the child with autism that's in the program. Yes, so I guess the answer to that question is yes. I also want to just stipulate that that the early child the quality of the early childhood education program is also an important feature, and it is measured by other, partly by this, but by other assessments like the ECHRS or the class or other assessments that might be Head Start specific.
Great, thank you, Sam. Let's see. We had a few listeners asking about the Affirm modules. One listener was asking, oops, sorry, my webinar panel is jumping around here. We had a listener who was asking if you have a general idea of when the 2 additional modules will be available that you had said were coming over the summer.
Yeah, so we have currently on our firm website modules related to those topics that are up and available now. The 2 that I was referencing are specific for paraprofessionals, and they include visual schedules as well as supporting peer interactions. Those will be upcoming over the summer. So probably they will both be up by August of this year. I will also say we also recently received funding to update the 5 additional practices based upon the new review. And so those will be updated over the course of this next year. So we hope to have those additional 5 practices based upon the new review available by the end of this year.
Great, thank you, Sam. I know you had said that several of the resources on the website were available in multiple languages, but we had a listener that was asking, are the modules available in Spanish?
So the modules themselves are not available in Spanish. The COVID resources are available in Spanish, so they should be able to access those resources, but unfortunately we haven't had funding to translate our actual module content into Spanish, but we would love to, so thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Can I jump in and go back to the previous question? And I'm not sure this was in our acknowledgments because because of the funding just came recently, but we wanted to acknowledge the support that we get from the Project Captain that is in California. They are I think the best examples of a sort of a statewide adoption of this type of NPDC model. They've adapted it for use in California and have a large cadre of teachers who now lead that professional development within the state.
Great, thank you, Sam and Ann. Let's see. We had one listener who was asking about the coaching process, and they were wondering if this is something that, oh, I lost the question again. Here we go. They were asking about the coaching process, and they were wondering if this is something that occurs primarily between teacher and teacher, or teacher and parent, or teacher and student, or is it kind of a mix depending on the situation?
Yeah, so the coaching process, it's usually provided by like technical assistance provider, or district level support staff, or school level support staff providing coaching around an evidence-based practice. Though I think that it could definitely be adapted to a teacher to provide that support, more of peer learning. If this person is interested in learning more about our coaching process overall, if they go to our NPDC website, which I don't think we included in our list of websites, but if you just Google NPDC and FPG, it'll come up. And we actually have our coaching manual is available to download on that website. So that might be a helpful resource.
Oh, great. Thank you, Ann. We had a listener who just asked if there were forms available to support the coaching process. Sort of would that manual contain any forms, I guess, related to pre-observation conference, the observation?
So the manual will include like information on the actual process for help on how to structure those pre-observation observation time points. I would strongly recommend using those fidelity checklists. That's what we used as part of our NPDC study that Sam described previously too. And so those are available on the Affirm website, where you can look and download implementation checklists or fidelity checklists for each of those evidence-based practices. And that can be used as a framework for what you're observing during that time frame and structure, like what will you work on for next time? What are next steps that might need to occur? So probably using that as well as the coaching manual would be a great resource.
Mm-hmm.
Could I add to that?
Yes.
In the project that we were just finishing up, that Ann was a leader on, as well as Jessica Steinbrenner, we developed a program for teachers to be able to coach paras to use a set of basic evidence-based practices that Ann just talked about. So it's that process is really sort of extended to sort of an in-classroom coaching for paraprofessionals. So I think that's a need that happens in a lot of classrooms. So Daniel, are you still there?
It sounds like Dan might have had some audio issues. So this is Amy stepping in. I think we're kind of approaching the end of our time together. I can quickly scan the list of questions. If anyone, there you go, Dan.
I'm sorry. Yes, the internet must have just gone out at my house, so I apologize. I'm just dialing in on my phone.
Thanks, Dan.
I apologize. We seem to be having quite a few technical difficulties. Oh, it looks like my internet may have just come back. Amy, can you still see the presentation on your end?
Yes, I can. Can you see the questions, or do you?
Yes, it looks like I'm back. Internet is back up.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Okay, I apologize for that. Okay, that was a bit of a bump. Let me just get myself situated again. Can Ann and Sam, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. It's hard to act quickly on the spot. Okay. So I apologize if I am repeating a question. We had one listener that was asking if these modules apply for high functioning students with ASD.
Yes, so they are written to, the original Affirm modules are written for kind of across the whole age spectrum. So we have kids is written for like early intervention all the way up to high school, as well as provides examples of how this might work in self-contained settings as well as in inclusive settings as well. So the principles of what are the steps of implementation do not change whether you're in a self-contained setting or an inclusive setting.
Great, thank you, Ann.
So, and I'll also add that that we have a Center on Secondary Education for Students with Autism that provides more information or additional information for actually a program model that we had established for high school students, both high function or students who are in the general education curriculum and will be graduating with a diploma, and students who are in an alternative curriculum. So that's an additional resource that for teachers who are interested in high school students that they might access.
Dan, is your internet still working? Can you hear us? It sounds like his internet might not be working. We apologize to all our listeners for all of our technical difficulties today.
Not a good day for internet, apparently.
And I will say we're all in different locations, so the internet seems to be spotty in multiple places today. So I think I can finish the rest of Dan's presentation. We'll wrap up the questions here, and if you don't mind advancing the slides. So for everyone listening, you will receive a certificate of attendance in an email tomorrow. And for anyone listening to the recording right now, just jot down that URL that's on your screen now, and you can go there and download the certificate for listening. And then the next slide, I think, is a survey slide. We're doing a survey. So the survey will pop up when you leave the webinar today, and also it'll be in an email tomorrow. So please fill out the survey. We would love to hear your feedback. And we'll be selecting one winner, one person to win one free book. Okay, and then if you'll go forward to the next slide. And we are giving all of our listeners today a discount code where you can save 20% on any product at brookspublishing.com. And so that code is coffee121. And then we also have a whole, we've been holding these coffee chats for the last 18 months approximately. So there's a whole backlog of recordings that you can watch on many topics. And we also have a couple more coming up this spring. I think we have 3 or 4 more webinars, coffee chats that are coming. So I encourage you to check out the upcoming events, and you might be interested in some of those as well. So thank you very much, Dr. Odom and Dr. Sam. We really appreciate you presenting, and thank you to all of our listeners who joined us today.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. We hope everyone has a great rest of your day.